I am Sarah Jenkins, a 35-year-old architect, and that day, standing outside the familiar iron gates of Willow Creek Estate, the place I had called home for my entire life, felt like an out-of-body experience. My sister Emily stood by the newly painted front door, her arm linked through David's, her husband. They both wore triumphant smiles, the kind that promised unspoken victories. The locks were new, gleaming brass against the aged oak. Emily, my younger sister who had always been overshadowed, now radiated an unsettling confidence. "This grand home is ours now," she smirked, her eyes gleaming with a mixture of pride and, I realized, with a sickening lurch malice. David, usually the quieter of the two, simply nodded, a smug curve to his lips. The air was thick with the scent of fresh paint and betrayal. I clutched the worn leather of my architectural portfolio, my fingers trembling slightly. Just weeks before, this house had been a sanctuary, filled with my ailing mother's gentle presence and the echoes of generations. Now it was a fortress, impenetrable and stripped of all its warmth. Before we delve into the depths of how betrayal can reshape one's entire world, I invite you to like and subscribe, to join me on this journey as we uncover what happens when the very foundations of family are shaken, and how sometimes our deepest wounds forge our greatest strengths. Before the storm broke, Willow Creek Estate wasn't just a house. It was the very fabric of my being, my oldest friend, and my most profound inspiration. As a 35-year-old architect specializing in historical preservation, the estate was both my personal sanctuary and my professional muse. Every creaking floorboard, every sun-drenched window, every sprawling oak in its vast gardens held a memory, a whisper of generations of Jenkinses who had called it home. It was the legacy of our family's deep roots in New England, a testament to enduring strength and quiet elegance, a place where time seemed to slow, where the past breathed in harmony with the present. The very stone of its foundation seemed imbued with the stories of my ancestors, from the Revolutionary War general who first acquired the land, to the Victorian-era matriarch who added the sprawling conservatory. I knew every hidden nook, every secret passage, every creaky step. This was more than property, it was a living chronicle of my family. My mother, Eleanor, had nurtured it with unwavering devotion after my father's passing a decade prior. She was a woman of gentle strength, a quiet pillar whose presence filled the grand rooms with warmth even as her physical health began to wane. Her silver hair, usually meticulously pinned, would often escape in soft wisps around her face, and her eyes, though increasingly clouded by the onset of age-related cognitive decline, still held glimmers of the sharp intellect and kind spirit I knew. My bond with her was built on shared history, mutual respect, and an unspoken understanding that transcended words. We'd spend hours in the sunroom, the scent of earth and blooming orchids thick in the air, sketching new ideas for the sprawling rose gardens or poring over old blueprints of the estate, dreaming of sensitive renovations that would honor its heritage while ensuring its longevity. "This house has a soul, Sarah," she'd often say, her voice soft but firm, a faraway look in her eyes. "It carries our history, it's your history too, inherited in your bones." I understood. The estate was a trust, a responsibility, a piece of our identity, not merely an asset. I was on the cusp of finalizing a significant preservation project for a landmark colonial building in Boston, a career-defining moment that promised to cement my reputation in the architectural community. It was a demanding, all-consuming endeavor, requiring late nights hunched over drafting tables, but one I tackled with passion, driven by the same reverence for history that defined my connection to Willow Creek. My life, though busy, felt profoundly aligned. My sister, Emily, 4 years my junior, was a different sort of plant entirely. Where I found solace in history and structure, Emily craved novelty and flash. She had always drifted from one passion project to another, a short-lived, poorly designed jewelry business that fizzled after 6 months, a disastrous foray into online influencer marketing that ended in a minor scandal, a fleeting attempt at a lifestyle brand that never quite launched. Each endeavor left a trail of enthusiastic beginnings, half-finished plans, and swift, expensive failures, often subsidized by mother's quiet generosity. Emily was vivacious, charming on the surface, but beneath there was a restless, almost desperate ambition, a hunger for recognition and material wealth that seemed insatiable. She married David Sterling, a real estate developer whose charm was as superficial as his ambition was boundless. David was sleek, impeccably dressed, with a handshake that felt just a little too firm and eyes that always seemed to be calculating. He saw properties not as homes or legacies, but as commodities to be flipped, maximized, and monetized for immediate profit. I never quite trusted him. He had a way of sizing people up, not for their character, but for their utility, assessing their worth based on what they could provide. Their visits to Willow Creek became more frequent, especially after Mother's health took a noticeable turn, marked by increasing forgetfulness, moments of confusion, and a growing physical frailty that confined her more and more to the first floor. Emily would fuss over Mother, bringing her fashionable silk shawls and expensive organic teas she'd seen advertised online, always ensuring David was present to witness her dutiful performance. David, meanwhile, would subtly appraise the estate, making comments about its untapped potential with a predatory glint in his eye. "This place is a gold mine, Alina," he'd say, gesturing around the antique-filled drawing room, a room that had hosted generations of Jenkins family gatherings. So much wasted space. Imagine the revenue from a luxury events venue or a boutique hotel, a proper commercial enterprise. Mother would just smile vaguely, her gaze often lost in the distance, a flicker of concern, almost fear, sometimes in her eyes when his voice got too loud or insistent. I dismissed it at first, attributing their intensified interest to genuine care for Mother, albeit expressed through their own materialistic lens. Emily would gush, her voice a little too bright. "We just want to help Sarah. Mother needs more support now, and David has such good business sense. He just wants to see her comfortable and the estate secure." I was too preoccupied with my demanding Boston project, too trusting in the sanctity of family, to see the insidious cracks forming beneath the veneer of their concern, too blind to the true nature of their visits. The first tangible shift came during one of Mother's bad days, when her memory was particularly clouded, and her usual gentle demeanor was replaced by a bewildered fragility. Emily called me, her voice pitched with a manufactured panic. "Sarah, you won't believe it. Mother fell again. Nothing serious, thank goodness, but she needs round-the-clock care now, and frankly, her finances are an absolute mess. David and I have been going over everything, and it's just not sustainable. She's bleeding money on this place." I was caught mid-presentation for a crucial client meeting, but the alarm in Emily's voice, real or feigned, was genuine enough to make me drop everything. "What do you mean, not sustainable?" I demanded, my heart hammering in my chest. Mother has always been meticulous with her investments. Emily launched into a rapid-fire, highly dramatized explanation of supposed financial woes, inflated medical bills that seemed to multiply overnight, astronomical property taxes, she insisted, had doubled maintenance costs for the sprawling estate that seemed wildly exaggerated, far beyond the careful budgets Mother had always maintained. "David thinks we need to consider some alternative revenue streams for Willow Creek," she continued, her voice softening into a feigned empathy. "Something to lighten Mother's burden, for her comfort and peace of mind." When I pressed for specifics, for actual figures, Emily grew vague, always deferring to David's expertise and promising detailed reports that never materialized. "He's drawing up some proposals," she'd insisted, "just conceptual, of course, for Mother's peace of mind." My unease grew, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I immediately offered to take over managing Mother's finances myself, to use my own substantial savings to help with her care, to hire additional nurses. But Emily vehemently refused, almost recoiled. "No, no, Sarah, that's too much for you. You're so busy, we've got it covered. David is a financial wizard, honestly. He's already streamlined so much." She even produced what looked like an official power of attorney document, allegedly signed by Mother, granting Emily full control over her medical and financial affairs. It looked legitimate at a glance, though the signature seemed shakier, less precise than Mother's usual elegant script. I attributed it to Mother's illness, her fading strength. I should have scrutinized it more closely, should have consulted my own legal contacts, but I was overwhelmed by grief, worry, and the demands of my career. As the weeks bled into months, Mother's condition deteriorated, and her lucidity became rarer, fleeting moments of recognition interspersed with long periods of quiet confusion. Emily and David seemed to take over completely, isolating Mother from longtime friends and even from me under the guise of minimizing stress. Visitors just exhaust her, Sarah, Emily would insist, her voice firm, blocking my attempts to sit with Mother for more than a few minutes. They moved into a guest wing of Willow Creek, ostensibly to be closer to Mother and provide constant care, but their presence felt more like an occupation, a subtle, insidious takeover. I'd arrived to find new, garish decor appearing in common areas, oversized, abstract modern art replacing cherished family portraits that had hung for centuries, cheap velvet throws tossed carelessly over antique settees. The comforting scent of Mother's jasmine tea and old books was replaced by the cloying smell of chemical pine cleaner and David's expensive cologne. Emily started hinting at Mother's legacy wishes, always emphasizing that Mother wanted to see Willow Creek transformed and vibrant while she was still alive. "She wants to leave a living legacy, Sarah, not a dusty old museum," Emily would say, her eyes darting towards David for affirmation. He would nod gravely, a silent accomplice. My architectural intuition screamed that something was terribly wrong. The subtle shifts in Mother's demeanor, the way she sometimes flinched when Emily or David entered the room, the vague, fearful glances she'd cast my way when they weren't looking, these were small tremors before a devastating earthquake. One evening, after a particularly strained visit where Emily hovered over us like a hawk, Mother had squeezed my hand beneath the blanket, her eyes wide with a fleeting terror. They make me sign things, Sarah," she'd whispered, her voice barely audible before Emily reappeared with a glass of bedtime tea. It was a chilling moment that cemented my suspicion. I began to keep a quiet record, a private journal of their unsettling comments, the strange financial documents I glimpsed haphazardly, the increasing isolation of my mother, the strange, fleeting moments of fear in Mother's eyes. I didn't know it then, but this seemingly innocent act of documenting my growing unease, these frantic, whispered notes in my phone, would become the blueprint for my eventual counterattack, the foundation of the justice I would seek against the very people who were meant to be my closest family. The feeling of unease solidified into a certainty. Emily and David were not just caring for Mother, they were systematically dismantling her autonomy, piece by painful piece. My mother, Eleanor, passed away peacefully in her sleep one Tuesday morning, her final days spent in the comfort of Willow Creek, though increasingly shadowed by Emily and David's constant, suffocating presence. Her passing left a gaping, raw wound in my heart, a profound sorrow compounded by the unsettling feeling that something had been deeply amiss in her final months. Despite their suffocating control, I had managed to steal a few private moments with her, holding her frail hand, whispering promises that Willow Creek would be protected, that her legacy would be honored. She would squeeze my hand weakly in return, her eyes, though clouded by illness, conveying a desperate plea that I couldn't quite decipher at the time. "Promise me, Sarah," she'd whispered one particularly lucid afternoon, her voice raspy, barely a breath. "Promise me you'll protect the house, our legacy." I promised, tears streaming down my face, assuring her I would honor her wishes, utterly unaware of the sinister machinations already in play. Looking back, I should have realized the true depth of the deception then, the way her eyes held a silent terror that had nothing to do with her illness, and everything to do with the two people who had insidiously inserted themselves into her life, like parasites, draining her will and her assets. Her funeral was a small affair, shockingly impersonal, orchestrated by Emily and David with an unsettling efficiency. They chose the music, the eulogies, and even vetted the guest list, ensuring that only those deemed appropriate were present. My mother's closest friends, her book club, her gardening circle, many were mysteriously uninvited or discouraged from attending. The service itself was brief, devoid of the warmth and genuine affection that had characterized my mother's life. There was no mention of Willow Creek's future during the service, only vague, self-serving pronouncements about honoring Mother's vision for progress and embracing change. Their performance was almost perfectly executed, a chilling display of performative grief that left me cold, my own sorrow battling with a growing sense of outrage. I watched Emily dab her eyes with a lace handkerchief, David offering somber nods to sympathetic acquaintances, and felt a profound disconnect, as if I were observing strangers playing roles in a play. Within days of the funeral, before I'd even had a chance to fully process my profound grief or the emptiness that had settled in Willow Creek, Emily and David, convened a meeting with Mother's longtime estate attorney, Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies was a kind, elderly man who had handled our family's legal affairs for decades, a man I trusted implicitly. I expected to hear the solemn reading of the true will, the confirmation of the inheritance I'd always known was destined for me. The full ownership of Willow Creek Estate, its sprawling grounds, and its extensive antique collection. Mother had always spoken of it as my inheritance, my responsibility, my future. "You understand the house, Sarah," she'd said countless times. "You appreciate its history, its very soul, in a way Emily simply doesn't." David, however, took the lead, an unnerving glint of triumph in his eyes that he barely bothered to conceal. He produced a crisp, newly drafted will, its pages starkly white against the aged oak of Mr. Davies' desk, dated just weeks before Mother's passing. Mr. Davies, looking uncharacteristically uncomfortable, his gaze darting between David and me, cleared his throat and began to read. The words hit me like a physical blow, each syllable a hammer stroke against my heart. The revised will stipulated that Willow Creek Estate, along with all its contents and a significant portion of Mother's financial assets, was to be placed into a newly formed trust, with Emily and David named as sole trustees and beneficiaries. My name, Sarah Jenkins, was conspicuously absent from any significant inheritance. I was to receive a paltry lump sum, barely enough to cover a few months' rent in my modest city apartment. "This can't be right," I whispered, my voice hoarse with disbelief and burgeoning terror. "This isn't Mother's will. It's not her signature." The signature at the bottom of the document, while attempting to mimic Mother's elegant script, was shaky, uneven, and bore little resemblance to the confident, flowing hand I knew so intimately from years of reviewing her documents and letters. It was a crude imitation, obvious to my trained architect's eye, which was accustomed to discerning authenticity in every line. Emily feigned shock, placing a delicate hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with a performance of innocent regret. "Oh, Sarah, don't be dramatic. You know Mother's mind wasn't what it used to be. She was very clear about this in her lucid moments. She wanted to secure the estate's future, and honestly, you're so busy with your career, she worried you couldn't give Willow Creek the attention it truly deserved." David stepped in, his voice smooth and condescending, dripping with false sympathy. "Eleanor had a clear vision, Sarah. She wanted Willow Creek to be a vibrant, revenue-generating property. Your architectural preservation ideas, while charming and quaint, simply weren't practical for a dying woman's legacy. This trust ensures the estate's prosperity, a proper commercial enterprise, not some crumbling relic." Mr. Davies fidgeted, avoiding my gaze, his discomfort palpable. "The document appears to be legally sound," he mumbled, though his body language screamed distress. "I question the legality of a will executed by someone in Mother's diminished mental state, citing her known cognitive decline." David simply shrugged, a dismissive gesture that set my teeth on edge. "We had it all notarized, Rebecca, several times, in fact. We even had reputable doctors confirm her lucidity during the signing. She was clear-headed enough to make her wishes known and to understand the implications. We were simply following her expressed desires." The implication was clear. They had meticulously covered their tracks, creating a paper trail that appeared impenetrable. They had not merely manipulated her. They had systematically isolated her, coerced her, and then legally disinherited me under the guise of her final, carefully considered wishes. The initial shock gave way to a cold, hard anger, simmering beneath my polite facade. My sister, my own flesh and blood, had conspired with her husband to rob me of my birthright, to desecrate Mother's true intentions, to erase my very existence from the family narrative. Emily, sensing my rising fury, approached me, her smile sickeningly sweet, a saccharine mask. "Look, Sarah, it's really for the best. You're a brilliant architect, you don't need this old house weighing you down. Think of it as a fresh start for Willow Creek. David has incredible plans to transform it into a luxury boutique hotel. Imagine, the Sterling Manor. It will be absolutely fabulous, darling, a real money spinner." The audacity of it, renaming our ancestral home after David, a man who had no genuine connection to its history, was the final, stinging insult, a slap across the face of generations. "You promised Mother," I seethed, my voice trembling with suppressed rage but my eyes locked on hers, trying to pierce through her facade. "You swore you would protect the house, honor her wishes." Emily's eyes hardened, losing all pretense of warmth. Mother's wishes changed, Sarah, and frankly, this is what's best for the family now. You just don't see the bigger picture. This is progress. David added, his voice dripping with condescension. Besides, what were you going to do with it? Let it fall into disrepair while you chased quaint pipe dreams of historical preservation. We're giving it new life, new purpose, unlocking its true commercial value. I knew then that I was facing not just a legal battle, but a full-blown war for my family's legacy, for my mother's honor, and for my own integrity. I left the lawyer's office in a daze, the revised will feeling like a burning brand in my hand, its words searing into my mind. That night, sleep was impossible. I replayed every conversation, every suspicious glance, every vague answer Emily and David had given me over the past months. The seemingly minor details I had meticulously journaled about: Emily's insistence on certain sedative medical treatments for Mother, David's constant appraisals of the estate's commercial viability, Mother's subtle, fleeting expressions of fear, now coalesced into a horrifying mosaic of calculated deception, a carefully orchestrated scheme. I remembered Mother's faint, desperate whisper from her deathbed, "Promise me, Sarah, protect the house." The promise was no longer just about sentiment. It was a sacred vow, a mandate to fight for what was rightfully ours, to prevent Willow Creek from being desecrated by their avarice. My grief was now intertwined with a fierce, burning determination. They thought they had won, that they had successfully woven an impenetrable web of deceit, buttressed by legal documents and fabricated medical opinions. But they had underestimated my resolve, my meticulous nature, and my deep, abiding love for Willow Creek. They hadn't just stolen a house, they had stolen a piece of my soul, a piece of my family's history, and I would fight tooth and nail to reclaim it. The architectural blueprints I was used to drafting had always been for creation, for building and preserving. Now, I realized with chilling clarity, I needed to draft a new kind of blueprint, one for their absolute and irrevocable downfall. The battle had just begun. The weeks that followed Mother's funeral and the shocking revelation of the new will were a blur of grief, simmering rage, and a methodical, almost obsessive, strategic planning. I retreated to my small, meticulously organized apartment in Boston, the silence amplifying the echoes of Emily and David's triumphant boasts that seemed to reverberate even across the miles. My professional life, usually a source of grounding and purpose, became a distant, muffled hum. Deadlines passed unnoticed, client calls went unanswered, and the landmark Boston Preservation Project, once so vital and inspiring, felt utterly meaningless in the face of such profound personal devastation. My colleagues and friends offered their sympathies, but few understood the depth of the wound. "It's just a house, Sarah," one well-meaning friend offered over a strained coffee. "You'll build a new life, a new home." They didn't understand Willow Creek was more than just property. It was my inheritance in every sense of the word, a repository of our family's very spirit, a living entity that defined who I was. Emily, meanwhile, continued her public victory tour, announcing her grand, garish plans for the Sterling Manor boutique hotel with breathless enthusiasm on her newly launched social media channels and in glossy spreads in local society papers. She posted glossy, digitally enhanced renderings, featuring sleek, soulless modern interiors that obliterated the estate's historic charm and insulted its heritage. "It's a fresh start for the estate," she declared in one particularly nauseating interview, her voice saccharine sweet. "A new chapter for the Jenkins legacy, reimagined for the 21st century by my visionary husband, David. He sees potential where others only see dust." Each post, each quote, each photograph of her posing triumphantly in front of Willow Creek's gates was a calculated jab, a public flaunting of their conquest, designed to rub salt in my fresh wounds and provoke a reaction. What Emily and David didn't know was that while they celebrated, while they tore down interior walls and ordered garish new furniture, I was meticulously constructing my own blueprint, not for a building, but for their absolute and irrevocable unraveling. My architectural background had instilled in me an obsessive attention to detail, a methodical, almost scientific approach to problem-solving, and a deep, intuitive understanding of structural integrity, or in this case, structural flaws, the subtle weaknesses in their deceitful edifice. I started with the basics, revisiting every document I had received concerning Mother's health and finances, every medical bill, every bank statement, every piece of correspondence. The power of attorney Emily had shown me, the doctor's notes attesting to Mother's lucidity during the will's signing. I scrutinized them under a high-powered magnifying glass, cross-referencing dates, comparing signatures with samples of Mother's handwriting from before her illness. My training taught me to look for inconsistencies, for hairline cracks in the facade of authenticity, for the telltale signs of forgery or undue influence. The signatures on the later documents, particularly the new will, were subtly different, more hesitant, more practiced than Mother's typical elegant, flowing hand. It was a faint tremor, a barely perceptible wobble, easily missed by the untrained eye, but glaringly obvious to someone who spent her life studying lines and forms, recognizing the unique fingerprint of a hand on paper. This wasn't just my grief, it was my professional expertise guiding me. My self-imposed isolation served a purpose. I adopted a calculated silence, responding to Emily's gloating texts with polite, noncommittal replies that belied the burning fury beneath. "That sounds ambitious, Emily," I'd type, my fingers hovering over the delete button, resisting the overwhelming urge to unleash the torrent of my rage and expose their lies. I wanted them to believe I was defeated, broken, too overwhelmed by grief and loss to fight back, a mourning sister lost in her sorrow. I wanted them to grow complacent, careless, to believe their victory was absolute and unchallenged. And they did. Emily's public announcements about the hotel became more extravagant, revealing intimate details about the estate's layout and internal systems, information she could only have gained by living there with Mother or by rifling through private family documents. David, emboldened by their apparent success and the lack of immediate challenge from me, started making premature inquiries about construction permits, discussing minor structural modifications to the historically designated property with shocking disregard. He seemed to think his status as a visionary developer and his newfound wealth would fast-track everything, bypassing tedious regulations. My meticulous research led me down several rabbit holes, uncovering disturbing patterns. I covertly reached out to Mother's longtime housekeeper, Maria, a small, stoic woman with a kind heart and a fierce loyalty to our family, whose hours had been mysteriously cut by Emily shortly after Mother's health declined. Maria, heartbroken by Mother's death and profoundly disturbed by Emily and David's hostile takeover of Willow Creek, proved to be an invaluable, if terrified, ally. We met clandestinely in a quiet corner of a public park, far from prying eyes. "They kept her confused, Miss Sarah," she whispered, her voice barely audible, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "They would give her special teas that made her drowsy, then bring in stacks of papers for her to sign. They even brought a doctor, not her usual one, a strange man who would just nod and agree with everything they said about her state of mind. He never really examined her." Maria, bless her meticulous heart, had kept a hidden journal of her own observations, a handwritten account of Mother's declining lucidity, of the strange visitors who came with papers, and of Emily and David's increasingly coercive and controlling behavior. Her entries were a damning testament to their systematic abuse, a horrifying chronicle of a vulnerable woman being exploited. This new evidence, particularly Maria's detailed log, gave me a concrete direction, a clear path forward. It wasn't just about a suspicious signature anymore. It was about elder abuse, undue influence, potentially medical fraud, and a larger pattern of calculated financial exploitation. My training as a corporate attorney, a past life I was now profoundly grateful for, a skill set I never imagined applying to my own family, resurfaced, reminding me of the critical importance of evidence collection, procedural exactitude, and the strategic formation of alliances. I knew I couldn't fight this battle alone, especially against David's likely aggressive and unscrupulous legal team, which I suspected would be as formidable as his ambition. I needed experts. I started making discreet inquiries, leveraging old professional contacts from my days at Harrington and Blake, but carefully, without revealing the full, raw extent of my personal crisis. I was looking for someone relentless, someone who understood the insidious nuances of financial malfeasance and elder law, someone who could see beyond the gleaming facade of the sterling manor to the deep, pervasive rot beneath. My initial plan was simple: gather irrefutable, undeniable evidence, establish a clear, documented timeline of their malicious actions, and then, when they least expected it, strike with surgical precision. The more Emily and David boasted, the more careless they became, unknowingly providing me with the very ammunition I needed to dismantle their entire empire of lies. My silence was not surrender. It was a strategy, a tactical retreat before a devastating counteroffensive. With a burgeoning dossier of evidence, Dr. Thorne's initial insights, Maria's courageous and detailed testimony, and my own painstaking research, I knew it was time to move beyond quiet observation. This wasn't a matter of merely grieving my mother's passing. It was a righteous, burning matter of justice for her and for Willow Creek. The architectural blueprint for their downfall required a specialized team, a demolition crew equipped with the precise tools and legal acumen to dismantle their carefully constructed edifice of lies. My first definitive call was to my former law school professor, Dr. Evelyn Thorne, a woman whose reputation for meticulousness and unflappable demeanor preceded her. She was now a highly respected forensic document examiner, a quiet but formidable expert in her field. I presented her with high-resolution scans of Mother's genuine signatures from old checks and letters, juxtaposed against the shaky, questionable signatures on the later documents, particularly the disputed will. Dr. Thorne, wearing her signature pince-nez, carefully reviewed each detail under a specialized microscope. The signatures on these later documents, particularly the will, show clear signs of coercion and diminished capacity, she stated, her voice calm but authoritative without a hint of sensationalism. There are subtle but undeniable inconsistencies in pen pressure, inexplicable hesitations where a natural signature flows, and an unusual deviation from your mother's established writing pattern. This was not freely given, Miss Jenkins. There are definite indications of undue influence or even guiding of the hand. Her expert analysis provided the crucial scientific underpinning I desperately needed, a cold, hard fact that could not be easily dismissed. Next, I sought out Arthur Vance, a renowned elder abuse attorney. I found him through a discreet referral from an old colleague who simply said, "If you want someone who fights like a pit bull for the vulnerable, Vance is your man." Arthur, a man with a shock of unruly white hair that seemed perpetually windswept and eyes that missed nothing, listened patiently as I laid out my entire, agonizing story. From Mother's gradual cognitive decline to the suspiciously timed will change and Emily and David's public grandstanding. He reviewed Dr. Thorne's comprehensive report and Maria's detailed sworn affidavit, meticulously typed from her handwritten journal entries, with a grim expression, his jaw tightening. "This is more than just a will contest, Sarah," he said, his voice low and gravelly but firm. "This is a textbook case of undue influence and elder financial abuse. The systematic isolation of your mother, the forged power of attorney, the sudden, drastic change in estate planning just weeks before her death. All while they were actively engaged in a scheme to convert a historical property for commercial gain, it all points to a calculated, premeditated scheme." Arthur's legal expertise was formidable, but his genuine compassion and quiet outrage were what truly solidified my trust. "We're going to fight this," he vowed, slamming his hand lightly on his desk. "For your mother, for her memory, and for justice, this kind of predatory behavior disgusts me." Simultaneously, leveraging my professional network, I reached out to a trusted contact in the municipal planning department, subtly inquiring about the exact process for converting historic residential estates into commercial properties. I learned that David, in his hubris and haste, had only made preliminary, informal inquiries and had not yet secured any of the necessary zoning changes, special use permits, or environmental impact assessments for the Sterling Manor boutique hotel. This was a critical vulnerability, a gaping hole in his self-assured plan. David's boasted minor structural modifications to a historically designated property would, in reality, require extensive review and approval from multiple city and state boards, and any deviations from protocol could lead to severe penalties, stop work orders, and crippling fines. My architectural intuition, honed by years of studying intricate building codes and structural integrity, screamed at the obvious shortcuts he would undoubtedly take in his rush to monetize Willow Creek. I discreetly gathered comprehensive architectural drawings and historical records of Willow Creek from the city archives, anticipating his every illicit move. My third critical addition to the team was Inspector Ben Carter from the city's Building and Safety Department. A gruff, no-nonsense official with a thick mustache and an unwavering commitment to procedure, Ben had a formidable reputation for unearthing hidden violations and holding developers accountable. I approached him not as a vengeful sister, but as a concerned architectural preservationist, expressing worries about potential unauthorized modifications to a significant historical landmark. "Inspector," I began, maintaining a professional distance, "I've heard whispers about a boutique hotel conversion at Willow Creek Estate. Given its historical designation and my professional interest in the property, I'm concerned that any major work might require extensive permits and strict adherence to preservation guidelines. I'd hate to see such a treasure compromised by hasty, unapproved construction." Ben nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took a sip from his perpetually lukewarm coffee. "We'll keep an eye on it, Miss Jenkins," he promised, his voice a low rumble. "We don't take kindly to people messing with our history, especially without the proper paperwork." He understood my underlying concern without me having to explicitly state my family's betrayal, perceiving it as a legitimate professional query, which it was. The final piece of my demolition crew fell into place when Arthur Vance suggested a private investigator specializing in corporate fraud and asset tracing. Mark Sterling, a grizzled veteran with a perpetually tired face but a steel-trap mind and a knack for unearthing complex financial irregularities, seemed almost too perfect for the job. He was not related to David, a fact I quickly confirmed. His initial findings were damning and swift. David had a long history of cutting corners, facing multiple unresolved lawsuits from disgruntled investors and former business partners regarding fraudulent investment schemes and property flips. More critically, Mark uncovered a sophisticated network of shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands, through which David had been secretly funneling funds from his previous, dubious projects. These illicit funds now mysteriously flowed into a new, seemingly legitimate account linked to the Sterling Manor Development LLC, the very entity created to manage the hotel conversion. This wasn't just about a stolen will or a disrespected legacy. It was about a deeply ingrained, habitual pattern of financial misconduct, a criminal enterprise masked by a veneer of legitimacy. Armed with Dr. Thorne's irrefutable forensic report, Maria's heart-wrenching testimony, Arthur Vance's formidable legal strategy, Inspector Carter's watchful eye, and Mark Sterling's explosive financial forensics, I felt a powerful resurgence of strength, a cold, focused determination. The quiet architect, once a bewildered victim, was now a meticulous, formidable strategist. I maintained my facade of defeat and sorrow, allowing Emily and David to continue their public boasting, their construction noise filling the once tranquil air of Willow Creek, believing their triumph was secure. They were so consumed by their imminent victory, so confident in their airtight legal shield, that they never once suspected the invisible network I was weaving around them, the web of justice I was meticulously spinning. Every grand press release Emily issued, every smug social media post featuring a new renovation detail, every loud instruction David bellowed to his unpermitted contractors, was unwittingly providing me with more ammunition, cementing their public persona as greedy usurpers, making their eventual fall even more resounding. My initial anger had cooled into a focused determination, a clear, unwavering understanding that true justice required not just exposing their crimes, but dismantling their entire carefully constructed empire of lies, brick by fraudulent brick. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to lead the charge, no longer a victim, but an avenger. The grand unveiling of the Sterling Manor Boutique Hotel was set for early summer, a lavish, ostentatious affair meant to cement Emily and David's newfound social standing and attract high-profile investors and media attention. They sent out elaborate, oversized invitations, embossed with a crude, new logo that offensively juxtaposed sleek, modern script with a stylized, almost unrecognizable image of Willow Creek's historic facade. My invitation, a mere courtesy, was delivered by a nervous messenger, and was a clear, calculated taunt, a bold challenge for me to witness their triumph, to bear witness to my own erasure. I received a text from Emily shortly after it arrived, her words dripping with false sweetness. "Hope you can make it, Sarah. It's going to be absolutely fabulous. You might even learn a thing or two about real estate development. We're setting new standards." It was the final straw, the spark that ignited the long smoldering fire of my resolve. This wasn't just about the money or the house anymore. It was about public humiliation, about erasing my very existence from the family narrative, about desecrating everything my mother stood for. I knew it was time to strike. My counterattack began quietly, a series of precisely timed, methodical moves designed to create an undeniable domino effect, each falling with chilling accuracy. The first domino fell with Inspector Ben Carter. Based on my detailed architectural insights, the initial, unapproved renovations David had begun, and a discreet, anonymous tip I had placed to his office, Ben initiated an unannounced, early morning inspection of Willow Creek. He arrived precisely at 8 a.m. on a crisp Tuesday morning. Just as a team of David's contractors, looking disgruntled and hurried, was beginning to tear down an interior load-bearing wall in the historic dining room without any proper permits or structural assessments. The sight of the estate's irreplaceable historic bones being carelessly exposed, ancient plaster crumbling to the floor, sent a fresh jolt of pain and fury through me, but I steeled myself, watching from a discreet distance. Ben, true to his gruff but by-the-book word, issued an immediate, unambiguous stop work order, his voice booming across the grand hall. He cited multiple egregious code violations, unauthorized structural changes to a historically designated property, and a complete lack of necessary permits. He also slapped them with hefty fines that would accumulate daily, and mandated a full, detailed structural assessment and permit application process that would take months, effectively halting all construction indefinitely. The news quickly spread like wildfire through the local contractor community, a ripple of gossip that instantly cast a dark shadow over David's visionary project. Next, Arthur Vance, my elder abuse attorney, made his move with swift, decisive precision. He filed a formal, comprehensive petition with the probate court, challenging the validity of Mother's last will and testament on irrefutable grounds of undue influence, diminished mental capacity, and outright fraud. He presented Dr. Evelyn Thorne's meticulously detailed forensic document analysis as irrefutable evidence of the coerced, almost certainly guided, signature on the disputed will. Accompanying it was Maria's brave, heartbreaking sworn affidavit, recounting Emily and David's systematic isolation and manipulation of my mother, detailing the specialties and the forced signings. The legal filings were accompanied by a critical request for an immediate injunction to freeze all assets related to Willow Creek Estate and the Sterling Manor Development LLC, preventing Emily and David from selling off any more historical artifacts, incurring further debt on the property, or taking on more unsuspecting investors. The court, presented with such compelling, multifaceted evidence, granted the injunction without delay, placing Willow Creek under temporary legal protection, effectively shutting down their ability to capitalize on their ill-gotten gains. The news of the injunction and the abrupt cessation of construction spread like wildfire throughout the community, reaching the local papers and online forums dedicated to historical preservation and local gossip. Suddenly, the glossy press releases from Emily and David, filled with their boasts and promises, seemed hollow, a grotesque parody of ambition. The triumphant narrative they had so carefully crafted began to unravel, exposing the lies beneath. David, his usual smooth composure shattered, called me late one night, his voice hoarse with fury and desperation. "What have you done, Sarah? You're destroying everything. This is insane. You need to call off your lawyer. We can work this out. I'll reconsider your position in the family. We can make this right." His voice, usually silken and condescending, was now laced with raw panic and a desperate plea for me to stop the unstoppable train I had set in motion. I didn't respond, simply listening to his increasingly frantic, unhinged pleas until he finally hung up, presumably to shout at Emily, whose own panicked, furious texts had begun to flood my phone. The final, most devastating blow came from Mark Sterling, the private investigator. While Emily and David scrambled desperately to address the rapidly escalating legal and construction setbacks, Mark, with impeccable timing, leaked his findings about David's extensive history of fraudulent schemes, his multiple lawsuits, and the suspicious shell corporation in the Cayman Islands to a prominent investigative journalist at the Boston Globe. The article, published on the eve of their planned grand opening, pulled no punches, its headlines screaming the truth. Historic estate hijacked. Allegations of elder abuse and fraudulent schemes surround the Sterling Manor project. It detailed Emily and David's manipulative exploitation of my ailing mother, the suspicious circumstances surrounding the new will, the unapproved and dangerous construction, and David's sordid history of financial misconduct. It quoted unnamed sources, Maria and myself, discreetly, detailing mother's isolation and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the will's signing, painting a devastating picture of their avarice. The article went viral instantly, picked up by national news outlets hungry for a sensational story about family betrayal and corporate greed. Emily and David's grand unveiling was a spectacular, humiliating disaster. Instead of high-profile investors and eager socialites, the meticulously decorated gates of Willow Creek were besieged by a horde of ravenous reporters, television news vans, and disgruntled contractors demanding answers about unpaid bills. The meticulously planned event crumbled spectacularly under the crushing weight of public scrutiny, legal injunctions, and widespread condemnation. I received a final, vitriolic text from Emily that morning. "You vindictive witch. You'll get nothing when I'm finished with you. This is war. You'll regret this, Sarah. You'll regret everything." Her fury was palpable, a boiling rage that even I, in my most vengeful moments, couldn't match. But it was too late. Their empire of lies, built on my mother's vulnerability and my family's sacred legacy, was already collapsing in on itself, consuming them whole. I sat in my small Boston apartment, watching the news reports unfold, a strange, complex mix of profound vindication and deep sorrow washing over me. They had fatally underestimated me, had mistaken my quiet nature and my grief for weakness. They had expected me to crumble, to retreat into despair, but instead, I had become the meticulous, relentless architect of their undeniable downfall. The tremors had begun, and the earthquake, their absolute destruction, was now inevitable. The aftermath of the Boston Globe exposé and the legal injunction was swift, brutal, and thoroughly public for Emily and David. Their carefully constructed facade of success imploded with spectacular force, revealing the deeply entrenched rot beneath. The local community, which had initially been charmed by Emily's charismatic boasts and David's grand promises of economic revitalization, turned on them with a fierce, moral vengeance. Protesters gathered daily outside Willow Creek's gates, holding hand-painted signs demanding justice for my mother's memory and condemning the Sterling Manor as a monument to unchecked greed and family betrayal. Their construction permits were not only suspended but permanently revoked. Their bank accounts related to the Willow Creek project were frozen solid by court order. And their few remaining investors, spooked by the media firestorm and the looming threat of class action lawsuits, began pulling out en masse, demanding refunds and threatening legal action. David's reputation, already shaky from his past dealings and whispered allegations, was utterly destroyed, irreparable. He was effectively blacklisted from any legitimate real estate development projects, his name synonymous with fraud and ethical bankruptcy. The very name Sterling Manor, which Emily had so proudly and arrogantly flaunted, became a local punchline, a byword for scandal and deceit. Emily, however, proved to be more volatile and emotionally unstable than David. While he retreated into a desperate, grim-faced shell of legal strategizing with his increasingly expensive and exasperated lawyers, Emily spiraled publicly and spectacularly. She bombarded my phone with erratic texts and voicemails, her tone swinging wildly between furious, spitting venom and pathetic, tearful pleas. "You'll regret this, Sarah, you think you've won. You've just destroyed our family, our very heritage," she'd shriek in one message, her voice hoarse with rage. The next, she'd be sobbing, barely coherent. "Please, Sarah, think of Mother, she wouldn't want this. We can fix this, just call off your lawyers. We're sisters, for goodness sake, family." Her desperation was a bitter, haunting symphony, a stark and pathetic contrast to her earlier smug confidence and self-righteousness. I ignored all her attempts at contact, knowing that any engagement, any response would only provide her with an opening to manipulate, to sow further discord, or to further inflame the already combustible situation. My resolve remained utterly unshaken. There was no turning back, no fixing what they had so deliberately and cruelly done. The bridge of our sisterhood had been burned, not by me, but by their avarice. The ongoing legal battle became a public spectacle, the courtroom almost as crowded as a theater. Arthur Vance, my steadfast elder abuse attorney, expertly presented our meticulously gathered case in probate court, detailing every shred of evidence of undue influence and elder abuse. Maria's tearful, eloquent testimony, recounting Emily and David's coercive tactics, their subtle cruelty, and her observations of mother's fear, painted a vivid, agonizing picture of my mother's final, vulnerable months. Dr. Thorne's forensic analysis of the will's signature left no room for doubt, her scientific precision dismantling any claim of authenticity. The testimony of the visiting doctor, whom Emily and David had brought in to attest to mother's alleged lucidity during the signing, crumbled entirely under Arthur's relentless cross-examination. When Arthur revealed his undisclosed financial ties to David's previous questionable ventures. The court proceedings, widely covered by the local and national media, painted Emily and David as callous, predatory opportunists who ruthlessly preyed on a dying woman, their own mother-in-law and sister, for personal gain. They tried to counter with desperate claims that I was merely a jealous, bitter sister, motivated by personal animosity and a desire for revenge. But the overwhelming, undeniable evidence of their systematic deceit, their calculated manipulations, and their long pattern of financial fraud made their desperate arguments ring utterly hollow. The judge, a stoic woman with a keen eye for truth, listened patiently, but her gaze on Emily and David hardened with each passing day. David, desperate and cornered, made one final, audacious, and ultimately foolish move. He covertly attempted to sell off some of Willow Creek's priceless antique furnishings and artwork, hoping to generate enough illicit cash to appease his rapidly multiplying creditors and to continue financing his increasingly untenable legal fight. But Mark Sterling, ever vigilant and anticipating such a move, had already alerted local auction houses and prominent art dealers to the ongoing legal dispute and the stolen nature of the estate's contents. When David attempted to list a particularly valuable 18th-century French tapestry, a cherished family heirloom that had hung in the main drawing room for generations, a piece Emily knew mother cherished above all else, he was immediately flagged. The auction house, acting responsibly, promptly notified authorities, and the tapestry, along with several other pieces he had attempted to sell, was seized as evidence, further cementing the public perception of him as a common thief, not a sophisticated developer. This act of blatant desperation solidified the true depth of their betrayal. They weren't just after the house and the financial assets, but anything they could liquidate for their own selfish gain, regardless of its profound sentimental or historical value. They were truly devoid of conscience. Meanwhile, Inspector Ben Carter, now completely on our side, issued even more stringent orders, demanding a full, comprehensive architectural and structural survey of Willow Creek due to the unauthorized, reckless modifications David had initiated. The independent survey revealed shocking further shortcuts, shoddy workmanship, and dangerous structural compromises David's unpermitted contractors had made, creating significant safety hazards that threatened the very integrity of the historic structure. The entire building was deemed unsafe for occupancy. The fines for the violations escalated daily, turning the Sterling Manor into an unfathomable financial sinkhole, a black hole of debt and liability. Emily and David were not only losing the brutal battle for the estate, but were now facing potentially crippling debt from monumental fines, exorbitant legal fees, and their monumentally failed investments. Their grandiose dream of a luxury boutique hotel had become a colossal, very public and utterly inescapable nightmare. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the leaves turned brilliant shades of crimson and gold around me, I received an anonymous text message. It was a clear, grainy photo of Emily and David looking utterly disheveled and clearly arguing furiously outside a greasy local diner, their faces etched with acute stress, desperation, and mutual recrimination. The accompanying caption simply read, "Karma's a bitch." It wasn't from me, but it resonated deeply, a quiet echo of the justice unfolding. Their undoing was public, excruciatingly humiliating, and utterly complete. There was no more grandstanding, no more boasting, only the grim, undeniable reality of their own making, a bitter harvest of their greed. I felt no joy in their suffering, only a quiet, profound sense of justice being served, and a deep, enduring relief that my beloved mother's memory and Willow Creek itself were finally being vindicated, their sacred trust upheld. The empire they had built on deception, on my mother's vulnerability, was now collapsing in on itself, brick by painful, crumbling brick. The legal proceedings, though extensive, finally culminated in a definitive resolution. With the overwhelming evidence of undue influence, elder abuse, and David's documented history of financial fraud, the probate court ultimately ruled decisively in my favor. The revised will was declared unequivocally invalid, legally null and void, and Mother's original will, which explicitly bequeathed Willow Creek estate and its contents directly to me, was reinstated, affirmed as the true expression of her wishes. The injunction freezing Willow Creek's assets became permanent, a legal fortress preventing Emily and David from further monetizing, liquidating, or damaging the property's irreplaceable historical elements. They were also ordered to pay substantial restitution for damages incurred during their unauthorized and reckless construction, as well as the exorbitant legal costs associated with the challenge I had mounted. It was a comprehensive victory, a resounding affirmation of justice, a vindication of my mother's memory. Emily and David, stripped of their power, their ill-gotten gains frozen, and facing mounting, insurmountable debts, were finally, legally and publicly forced to vacate Willow Creek estate. I returned to the estate one crisp autumn morning, a few days after their final, bitter departure. The air felt fresh and clean, devoid of the chemical scent of their hurried, cheap new paint and the oppressive, greedy presence of their ambition. The gaudy Sterling Manor signage had been hastily removed from the main gate, leaving faint, ghostly marks on the ancient stone columns like a scar on the land. The front door, still bearing the new, gleaming brass locks they had installed, now swung open at my touch, the key feeling heavy with history, responsibility, and the quiet weight of triumph. Walking through the silent, echoing rooms, I saw the undeniable scars of their brief, destructive tenure. Patched up holes where the tasteless modern art had hung, faint outlines on the elegant wallpaper where cherished family portraits had been crudely removed. The grand drawing room, once filled with my mother's gentle laughter and the comforting scent of beeswax polish, felt empty, haunted by the echoes of their boasts and bitter arguments. It would take time and a great deal of love to heal the house, to restore its true spirit, just as it would take time to heal the deep, lingering wounds within myself. My first priority was to meticulously undo the damage David's reckless, unpermitted construction had inflicted upon the historic structure. Inspector Ben Carter, now a staunch and very vocal ally, helped me navigate the complex bureaucratic process, ensuring all repairs were done to the highest historical preservation standards, adhering to every regulation. The illegal structural modifications were painstakingly undone, the authentic, period-appropriate materials sourced and restored, and the estate slowly began to breathe again, exhaling the garish layers Emily had imposed. I worked tirelessly, often late into the night, pouring every ounce of my architectural expertise and my very heart into every intricate detail, driven by a deep, burning desire to honor Mother's true wishes and restore Willow Creek's inherent dignity. The process was profoundly cathartic, a tangible act of healing, a physical manifestation of my reclaiming what was ours. As for Emily and David, their downfall was swift, absolute, and tragically complete. David faced multiple civil lawsuits from his former investors and business partners, leveraging the devastating evidence uncovered by Mark Sterling. His shell corporation in the Cayman Islands was seized, his remaining assets frozen, and his once boasted reputation in the real estate world was shattered beyond any hope of repair. He was publicly shamed, his name becoming a byword for fraud and utter unreliability. He reportedly vanished from public life, unable to escape the crushing shadow of his disgraced name. Emily, less legally culpable but equally disgraced and emotionally volatile, became a social pariah, shunned by former acquaintances. Her desperate attempts to rebuild her public image through her once influential social media presence were met with widespread ridicule, outrage, and public shaming. The last I heard, she and David had finally, bitterly separated, their partnership of greed having ultimately consumed itself. Emily moved back in with distant, disapproving relatives, a pathetic shadow of her former boastful self, her grand ambitions reduced to nothing but dust and public scorn. I felt no joy in their misery, only a quiet, profound sadness for what could have been, for the sister I had tragically lost long before mother passed, a casualty of her own insatiable greed. With Willow Creek restored to its former glory, its wounds carefully mended, the question of its permanent future weighed heavily on me. I had achieved justice, undeniable and complete, but I didn't want the estate to simply be a silent, beautiful monument to a painful past. I remembered Mother's words, spoken so faintly on her deathbed, "Promise me you'll protect the house, our legacy," and her lifelong desire for a living legacy, a place that contributed actively to the world. After much thoughtful consideration and consultation with community leaders and preservation societies, a few months later, I announced my decision. Willow Creek Estate would be lovingly repurposed as the Eleanor Jenkins Community Arts and Heritage Center, a nonprofit foundation dedicated to promoting local arts, preserving historical craftsmanship, and offering invaluable educational programs to the wider community. It would be a vibrant place where creativity flourished, where history was actively celebrated, and where beauty and inspiration were accessible to all, not just a privileged few. The transformation was slow, meticulous, but deeply, profoundly rewarding. Local artists, passionate historians, and dedicated community leaders embraced the vision with overwhelming enthusiasm. Volunteers poured their time, energy, and love into creating sun-drenched art studios, spacious exhibition spaces, and interactive learning workshops within the estate's grand, historic rooms. The sprawling gardens, once meticulously manicured for private enjoyment, were open to the public, becoming a serene space for outdoor concerts, art installations, and quiet contemplation. The very essence of Willow Creek, its soul, was not just preserved but amplified, shared with a wider, appreciative community, honoring Mother's true spirit of generosity and intellectual curiosity in a way Emily and David, in their limited worldview, could never have imagined. My inheritance wasn't just the physical estate. It was the invaluable opportunity to transform profound betrayal into expansive generosity, to turn a symbol of avarice and greed into a shining beacon of hope, creativity, and community spirit. 1 year later, Willow Creek Estate, now vibrantly alive and teeming with activity as the Eleanor Jenkins Community Arts and Heritage Center, stood as a magnificent testament to resilience, enduring beauty, and the powerful, transformative force of a true legacy. The grand rooms, once echoing with the ghost of my mother's illness and my sister's grasping greed, now hummed with the joyful sounds of children's laughter during art classes, the quiet murmur of guided historical tour, and the dedicated concentration of local artisans at work. My original vision for the estate, one of quiet preservation and restoration, had organically expanded to encompass a dynamic community hub, a space that embodied Mother's spirit of quiet generosity and passion for culture far more profoundly than any exclusive boutique hotel ever could. I served as the center's executive director, pouring every ounce of my architectural expertise into its ongoing restoration, sensitive development, and programming, finding a renewed sense of purpose and fulfillment that transcended any professional ambition I'd harbored before. This was true success. The center thrived beyond my wildest dreams, attracting significant grants and generous donations from across the region and beyond, drawn by its unique mission, its powerful story of transformation, and its undeniable positive impact. The Boston Globe, which had initially broken the devastating scandal, later ran a glowing, heartfelt feature on the center, praising its profound community impact and my unwavering dedication. The article subtly but powerfully highlighted the ironic contrast between Emily and David's initial destructive, selfish plans, and the positive, lasting legacy that had emerged from the ashes of their devastating betrayal. This public vindication, far more satisfying and meaningful than any legal victory, solidified my reputation not just as an architect, but as a steadfast advocate for integrity, community, and the profound power of art. Emily and David's story, meanwhile, faded into the annals of local cautionary tales, a grim reminder of unchecked ambition. David's legal battles eventually culminated in a public declaration of bankruptcy and a permanent disbarment from real estate development, his career utterly annihilated. He reportedly vanished from public life, unable to escape the crushing shadow of his shattered reputation. Emily, isolated, resentful, and utterly unrepentant, occasionally attempted to re-enter old social circles, but her name remained irrevocably tainted. The last I heard, she was working a low-paying, anonymous job in a city far away, a stark and pathetic contrast to the luxurious, public life she had once envisioned for herself at the Sterling Manor. Their relentless pursuit of material gain had led to their absolute, self-inflicted ruin, a stark and fitting karmic consequence. I never spoke to Emily again, nor did I seek any contact. The emotional chasm between us was too vast, too deep to bridge, filled with too many broken promises and too much betrayal. My personal healing, however, was a quieter, more profound, and ongoing journey. I continued therapy, meticulously processing the complex, layered grief of losing not only my mother but also the sister I once knew, the person I believed she was before greed consumed her. "You've navigated an extraordinary betrayal with remarkable strength, Sarah," my therapist observed during one session. "Your ability to transmute such profound pain into a positive, tangible, and beautiful contribution to the world is truly inspiring. It's a testament to your character." I learned to trust my instincts implicitly, to recognize red flags, and to protect my emotional boundaries with a vigilance I had never known before. The experience made me more discerning, more cautious, but paradoxically, also more open to genuine, authentic connection. I reconnected deeply with friends and family members who had supported me unwaveringly through the ordeal, appreciating their unwavering loyalty and kindness in a way I hadn't before. The most profound outcome of this entire, harrowing journey was the deep, transformative shift in my understanding of what truly constitutes a legacy. It wasn't about inheritance or property lines, about material wealth or public accolades. It was about the indelible impact we choose to leave on the world, the good we do, the values we courageously uphold, and the integrity with which we live our lives. Willow Creek, once a painful symbol of what was stolen, became a vibrant, living beacon of what could be built anew, a testament to resilience. In his arrogant attempt to disinherit me and appropriate my family's sacred heritage for his own selfish gain, David had inadvertently provided the catalyst for me to build a more meaningful, more purposeful life, deeply rooted in community, art, and compassionate service. My life after the betrayal became my personal kintsugi, the Japanese art of mending broken pottery with gold lacquer. The profound broken places, the agonizing cracks in my family and my heart, were not hidden but carefully mended and celebrated, made beautiful by the wisdom, resilience, and newfound purpose that filled them, creating something far more valuable and meaningful than what existed before. Have you ever experienced a similar situation, where profound betrayal from those closest to you forced you to rebuild your life from the ground up? What helped you navigate those complex, overwhelming feelings of anger, grief, and ultimately, determination? I'd absolutely love to hear your stories and insights in the comments below. And if this story resonated deeply with you, please make sure to subscribe and share it with someone who might desperately need to hear that the initial devastation doesn't determine your story's ending, and that healing is always possible. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes our greatest strength emerges not despite our most painful moments, but directly from them, forging a stronger, more beautiful you.